So, what do you get when you combine one-liner grenades, a villain dressed in chainmail, and Arnold Schwarzenegger chucking saw blades like frisbees? It sounds like the start of a bad joke, but the answer is Commando. The testosterone-fueled, unhinged fever dream, that too in slow motion, Commando is what was considered badass in the 80s. But then, what went wrong? Why did this movie fade away into oblivion? Was it too macho? Too commando for its own good? Either way, let's find out WTF happened to Commando 1985. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Background and production origins. The time was the mid-80s, the peak of Hollywood in all of its neon-drenched glory, where adjectives like explosive, muscular, and bombastic were used to describe every other movie out there. Intriguingly though, Commando wasn't intended to be the flashy one-man army muscle fest that it eventually came to be known as. Nor was it designed keeping in mind the macho Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was riding high on the success of the Terminator to flex his muscles and floor enemies with epic one-liners delivered with a smolder. The original script, surprisingly, was peaceful. Yeah, not exactly the first word that comes to mind when we think of Commando. Joseph Loeb III, the writer, had planned for the story to revolve around an Israeli soldier who had turned over a new leaf and renounced violence, so definitely more yoga and meditation, and less man impaling a guy with a pipe and saying, "Let off some steam." The role was written keeping Gene Simmons in mind, as a matter of fact. Yeah, Gene Simmons from Kiss. Gene Simmons with Cher Gene Simmons. But after he declined the offer, the role was wide open for Schwarzenegger, the buff bodybuilder fresh off the mega success of the explosive hit The Terminator just a year before in 1984. Joel Silver, the producer of this film, scouted Schwarzenegger and zeroed in on him as the ideal candidate to carry the film, ironically both literally and figuratively. Enter Stephen E. D'Souza, the rewrite king of the 80s, who also goes on to become the writer of epic movies like Die Hard and The Running Man. He took Loeb's peaceful draft and basically injected it with steroids until it became the sleeves-off, oiled-up, jacked script we know today. The supposed protagonist, the violence-renouncing soldier, John Matrix, is depicted as a buff, hulking guy who tosses whatever comes in his path away like it's cardboard, be it trees, henchmen, or even trucks. According to D'Souza, modifying the plot to tailor to Schwarzenegger was easy. He just had to dial everything to 11 and let it remain like that throughout. Then came director Mark L. Lester, fresh off of Firestarter, who was eager to channel his inner action junkie once more. Both Lester and Silver planned to keep the general vibe of the movie very over-the-top fantasy action rather than the gritty war drama that was initially intended. Then, with Schwarzenegger on board, the rest of the pieces just started falling into place. The filming was quick, with Silver's signature style screaming out his name and bleeding into almost all the action sequences, be they grenade tosses or punches with a side of badass, pun intended one-liner. Lester played his part, prioritizing practical stunts and non-stop momentum, pushing the production full throttle. It's wild how much of the final product revolved around Schwarzenegger's physicality and slathered oily muscles. To put it literally, the script bent itself around his biceps. With logical reasoning out the window, Commando simply operated on the let's make it bigger, crazier, and cheesier philosophy. Of course, there was always the safe option of just blowing stuff up, and they did that plenty too. Plot summary and characters. The movie kicks off in the quiet hills of California, where former U.S. Army Special Forces Colonel John Matrix, played by none other than Mr. Schwarzenegger, is enjoying his retirement and living with his daughter Jenny. Jenny is the epitome of innocence and sweet wonder. She's played by Alyssa Milano, and you're just counting down until she gets kidnapped. Life is all fun, easy breezy for the duo. They chop wood, grill sandwiches, and have classic father-daughter bonding moments in the sunshine, until they stop. Bodies start turning up all of a sudden, and General Kirby, played by James Olsen, informs Matrix that all those who are being targeted and killed were in fact members of Matrix's old unit. The culprits? A group of mercenaries, all with a vendetta, and led by Matrix's former teammate, Bennett, now unhinged and looking for payback, and played by Vernon Wells. What better way to get payback than by using the most in-your-face method possible? Bennett kidnaps Jenny, his daughter, to strike back at the one-man army himself. With Jenny in their clutches, the mercs force John Matrix into a plane to Val Verde Faraday in order to carry out an assassination for their employer, Arius. Arius is a mustache-twirling, exiled tyrant who wants to remove his successor with a motive to regain power. But do you really think John Matrix is capable of supporting diplomacy, or even flying commercial for that matter? Mid-flight, he snaps his escort's neck and escapes by jumping off the plane right before takeoff. He's now got 11 hours before the flight lands to go rescue his beloved daughter and kill everyone, John Wick style, teaming up with a feisty flight attendant named Cindy, played by Ray Dawn Chong, who is initially skeptical about the whole deal but quickly hops on board as Matrix dangles a sleazy informant named Sully over a cliff with one of the better one-liners, going all, "Remember, Sully, when I said I'd kill you last? I lied." Cindy is obviously all in because why not? What sane person wouldn't be? Together they find Sully's motel meeting spot and come face to face with Cook, a henchman and former Green Beret. Obviously, a brawl follows, which is anything but ordinary, and ends with Matrix impaling Cook on a table leg. They discover the location of Arius' private island, but to get there, what would be their first course of action? Of course, robbing a surplus store for firearms. Matrix gets arrested during the break-in, but heroic Cindy, just a regular flight attendant a few minutes before, helps him escape by firing a rocket launcher at the police van. Matrix, now fully armed, storms the island in a seaplane, ready to fight Arius and his private militia all on his own. What follows is classic 80s cinema. Exploding sheds, booby traps, knives, grenades flying through the air, and Matrix mowing through the army, killing Arius before moving on to confront Bennett, and that ends with his iconic closer line, "Let off some steam," before he drives a pipe through Bennett's chest. Cindy, who's gotten in touch with Kirby, arrives on the island too, better late than never, and offers Matrix his job back. But obviously, Matrix being Matrix, walks away with Jenny and Cindy, leaving rubble and ashes behind. Yep, classic 80s cinema. Try pulling that off in the 2025 recessional job market. Production challenges and changes. It all started when Barry Diller, newly appointed head of 20th Century Fox, gave the movie the go-ahead on one condition: it had to cost less than $12 million. From the outside, the brash movie strewn with bullets and explosions looked perfect, at least by 80s standards. But in reality, production was hanging on by a thread. Budget cuts, last-minute rewrites, and on-the-fly improvisation wasn't a good idea for this movie. The biggest devil was budget limitations. The supposed final showdown was supposed to take place on a beach, with the villain Bennett kidnapping Jenny and fleeing in a speedboat, as our hero Matrix, chased in his own vessel, muscles taut, ready for action, after landing on a shady-looking, war-ravaged beach that would have been lined by landmines, machine gun nests, and the whole shebang. But action, as it turns out, requires money, and by the time the crew finished shooting at Arius' island fortress, production was almost nearly broke. Director Lester had no choice but to improvise. The studio that kind of saw the situation coming had already warned Lester that the beach scene would be impossible to fit in the budget, and to instead use a location that 20th Century Fox already owned. And what he came up with wasn't scenic in any way, but it was available and, more importantly, free. So the cramped industrial furnace room it was. The sweaty bare-knuckle brawl that follows between Matrix and Bennett, which is often described as steamy, quite literally considering it was shot in a furnace room, ended up becoming one of the most defining and iconic moments of the entire movie. While we're on the topic of the limited budget, limited stuntmen meant many were killed multiple times. Some of these actors were shot, stabbed, and blown up, or sometimes all three in the same scene, just with a change of clothing and the makeup done slightly differently. In fact, it was a running joke on the set amongst the stuntmen that if you're killed early, you're coming back in the next shot. Budget wasn't the only challenge the production faced while filming. Considering Schwarzenegger's hulked-up physique, it was impossible to find a body double to perform stunt sequences in his place. So most of the stunts, which were a lot to begin with, were all shot by Schwarzenegger himself. He even insisted on doing close-up prop shots like him sheathing a knife because, as he put it, "My hand cannot be duplicated, it's one of a kind." Well, it was also this commitment that ultimately landed him in the hospital, having sliced himself up mid-scene. Sure, the movie's got some continuity issues and some pretty hasty editing and rewrites, but honestly, that's part of what makes Commando so entertaining in its own wild, adrenaline-fueled way. Box office and critical reception. After Commando hit screens in October 1985, obviously nobody expected the film, whose main lead was named John Matrix, to become a hit. Yet that's exactly what happened. Thin plotline, bullets, beefed up muscles and all. The movie, made on a modest $9 million budget, $10 million if we consider post-production expenses, managed to generate over $57.5 million worldwide. And yet again, the power of Schwarzenegger and his ruggedly good physique stole the show and also proved just how much much the audience loves the brawn over the brain, and of course, the deadpan one-liners. Commando also debuted at #1 at the US box office during its opening weekend, and even went on ahead to continue holding the spot for 3 consecutive weeks, giving a decent competition to the others in the category, and still emerging at the top, or rather, should I say, exploding to the top. And of course, it didn't hit the Terminator levels of numbers, but Commando was surprisingly a big financial win for 20th Century Fox. The movie also helped cement a firm hold on the now growing superstar Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was basking in the glow of being the leading action star along with his fellow co-star, the antagonist Bennett, played by Vernon Wells, who was also appreciated for his legendary performance. Now, if we talk about critical reception, the story's quite different. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 5.8 out of 10 rating with 68% approval, which isn't great, but it's not the worst either. In fact, the site themselves calls Commando the ultimate 80s Schwarzenegger film that has it all. A threadbare plot, action on steroids, and of course, goes without saying, like how did you even think we would forget, the epic, not to mention endless one-liners. Even IMDb gave it a pretty decent score of 6.7 out of 10. Critics are split between thinking the movie is, for what it is, an absolute over-the-top action spectacle, and those who couldn't see past the bullets and biceps and wished for a real, deeper storyline. The tougher critics, however, didn't mince words, like DJ.R. Bruckner of the New York Times, who straight up disregarded 2/3 of the movie as utter mayhem. It's unrelieved by humor and untouched by humanity. He also said the only saving grace to the following sequels would be if clever writers wrote it and low-key subtler directors directed it. Variety called out the definite entertainment value of the movie, and in contrast, the LA Times brutally, yet fittingly, called it what everyone was thinking, a gory crowd pleaser, and wished the movie had an ending befitting the powerful punch of a start that it had. In fact, some critics even called out the movie, or at least the second part of it, a poor man's Rambo. Although critically, the movie's reception was, let's call it for what it was, lukewarm, the movie did gross more than anybody would have expected, giving it cult classic status in the genre. Competing head-to-head with big names of the genre, Commando was the steam that no one saw coming that had to be let off to show the world that subtlety is optional when you've got Arnold in a rocket launcher. Legacy, sequel myths, and genre impact. It's decades later, and this WTF movie is still being quoted, parodied, and obviously used in meme templates. But one thing fans couldn't help but notice is that while its contemporaries fired off sequel after sequel, Commando stood solo, much like its protagonist, the one-man army John Matrix. No Commando universe came out, there was no franchise, just one movie and one Matrix. Although there were rumors that a sequel to Commando was in the works, it haunted fans for ages, much like the chainmail tank top situation that was going on with Bennett. Some rumors even floated around that Die Hard was actually what Commando 2 had been intended to be, but was just released under a different name. Logically, it seems very much plausible. I mean, there are quite a few similarities, like Rogue Hero, check. Chaos following and bullets flying, check. Bad guys with worse accents, check. But Commando writer Steven D'Souza quickly dismissed the rumor and cleared the smoke around it, calling it completely wrong and baseless. And although Commando 2 was in the drafts being worked on by none other than Frank Darabont, the Shawshank Redemption legend, it was totally different from Die Hard. For the plot of Commando 2, according to Sousa, Matrix was supposed to be hired as a head of security for a shady corporation before realizing it was a front. Being the epitome of morality that Matrix is, a one-man army would get into action to fight all the bad guys with the nonchalance of grocery shopping on a random Tuesday. Cue the betrayal, the explosions, and probably somebody getting impaled on a steam pipe again. As to why this didn't pan out into an actual sequel, the answer probably lies within the studio itself. Maybe they feared the magic of Matrix and his macho personality wouldn't strike twice, or maybe the set couldn't handle the stress of wrapping up the movie on a limited budget again. Coming to the impact the movie had globally, it became something of a genre-defining film that, warped as it was, somehow managed to add comedy, carnage, cheese, and charisma together into a slightly imperfect amalgamation that audiences loved. Over the decades, Commando gained cult classic status, inspiring everything from video games to parodies. In fact, the movie was also hinted at and spoofed in The Simpsons. Funnily enough, a perfect example of the crazy impact Commando had on audiences was seen in an African nation where the kids allegedly watched Commando to hype themselves up for war. Of course, who needs training modules and montages when Schwarzenegger has already done it for us with such ease, flipping phone booths casually with a hand? Despite never getting a sequel, funnily enough, if you think about it, Commando became famous because no one in the film was trying to be funny. That's what made it so amusing, like literal comedy gold. So, be it the writers that wrote it or the actors that delivered it, Commando sure left a legacy, if not in terms of a sequel, at least by heavily influencing an entire generation. Honestly, if real armies had commandos like Matrix, war would probably be obsolete by now. We'd just flex, fire off a one-liner, and call it a day. Maybe it's best that Commando never got a sequel. It didn't need one. After all, what's a movie about a one-man army if it has a sequel to follow? Goofs, alternate versions, and trivia. Okay, so obviously, if you're someone looking for airtight logic or plot lines that all connect flawlessly in the end, then Commando's probably not for you. But if your vibe is more shirtless and ripped lone wolves, then Commando's more up your alley. But even in a film where a flight attendant who's been roped into a very dangerous plan aces firing a rocket launcher and the main lead turns himself into a homicidal Bob the Builder and calmly proceeds to scalp a henchman, it has its own share of gloriously blatant goofs. Take, for example, the iconic legendary painted Porsche. In spite of being sideswiped and even dented quite seriously, one flip and the car magically fixes itself. Either it's a serious continuity error or a great advertisement for Porsche. Another big one is that Matrix and several characters wear digital watches throughout the film, but they mysteriously change models and styles between scenes. See, that's why Matrix doesn't need a sequel. It just wouldn't be cool enough nor stylish enough. When Matrix makes his escape out of the airplane and climbs into the wheel well and down into the swamp, no one, let alone his kidnappers, not even the ground crew, passengers, or anyone for that matter, notices a man opening a hatch, breaking open a panel, and jumping halfway through takeoff. And then, yeah, that swamp must have magical properties because there emerges Matrix, bone dry in some shots and soaking wet in others. Another issue stems from Ray Dawn Chong's character Cindy, who seems to shift her accent from a regular American one to a very posh, put-on, wannabe British accent, suggesting that the ADR work seemed to be rushed in post-production. When it comes to alternate or uncut versions, the UK and Australia version had a rough ride with Commando. The initial release had up to 57 seconds cut out, including some axe tool action, arm amputations, and also the most unforgettable scene, which gave us the epic line of "blow some steam," the pipe through the chest moment. In fact, it wasn't until 2007, almost 2 decades later, that the uncut version was released in the UK. In Sweden, Commando was actually banned, not once but twice. Only after chopping 15 full minutes did it reach home video, though what was left was more of a highlight reel than the full blood-soaked saga. Even Germany had released a chopped-up version, at least until 2010, when the film was finally declared uncut and approved with an 18+ rating. Now, when it comes to alternate versions of Commando, we have to mention the 2007 director's cut. It added a whole extra minute and 41 seconds, mostly more blood and action, and even a bit of extra depth for Matrix. Like there's actually a moment where he mourns Jenny's mom, which the original cut didn't even touch. Oh, and the trivia here is wild. Did you know there was a Russian remake in 2008 called D-Day? The lead actor literally cast his real-life daughter in the role of Jenny. Yeah, the one Alyssa Milano played. Speaking of Milano, she actually became a huge pop star in Japan after Commando blew up there. No joke, she dropped 5 platinum albums, all thanks to this one over-the-top action flick. Marvelous verdict. In the end, Commando 1985 is pure unfiltered WTF cinema, an absurd roller coaster of biceps, bullets, and bonkers one-liners. It's a movie where logic has left the chat and entertainment and nonsensical chaos takes over, but despite everything about this movie making us go WTF, the movie did pretty well for itself. Sure, by today's standards, there are way better movies out there in 2025, but for 80s action flair, this thing was low-key comedy gold. We recommend watching it, not taking it too seriously, and having an amazing time. So now we ask you, which gloriously over-the-top scene from Commando lives rent-free in your head? Let us know in the comments down below, and if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.